So Imran, why do Muslims pray 5 times a day?
That's a very good question, Chris. And I'd love to answer that for you. But before we get into that discussion, if you don't mind, bro, can I just share a few of the sort of basic concepts of Islam with you first? And the reason I'm saying that, bro, is because once I get those across to you, the question you've asked me, it'll be so much easier for you to understand the answer to that question. So you got a while, yeah?
Yeah, go for it.
How long do you have?
As long as it takes.
Okay, brilliant. So before we start the discussion, Chris, another thing I want to quickly establish, just so we have a really fruitful discussion and we sort of don't waste time and get right to the core of things. For any good conversation to take place, would you agree that we should employ common sense?
Of course.
Yeah, exactly. So the type of reasoning we use for our day-to-day things, right? So for example, if I was to say to you, Chris, would you cross the road or the M4, the motorway blindfolded? Would you do that? No. But you haven't experienced it. But the reason you won't do it is because common sense dictates that if you were to do that, you will end up most likely killing yourself, right? Yeah. So you wouldn't do that. So the same type of common sense I want to apply to our discussion, just so we make the most of the time that we have together. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay. Brilliant. So the very first thing, Chris, I wanna touch upon or ask you is, what's your belief in regards to God? What do you believe about God?
I'd say I'm on the fence.
Okay.
Sort of agnostic-ish persuasion. So I don't believe there's nothing. Let's say that. But I don't believe necessarily there is one God or there is some spiritual dimension.
Okay, so Chris, if you don't mind, let me share what I believe is a really beautiful, simple, yet powerful argument for God's existence with you, which should hopefully take you off the fence and bring you towards the belief in God, right? So the argument I want to share with you is a very simple, what you call a design argument, right? And I want you to think about this for a second, Chris. You have a cup of coffee in your hand, which you're sipping on right now.
Very good coffee.
Very nice coffee, yeah. So let's take my cup, for example, because I don't want to stop you from sipping your coffee. But my cup of coffee. Now imagine for a second, if I said to you, this coffee, I just came into this coffee shop earlier today, and this coffee cup just emerged right in front of me. Out of nothing, it just made itself, formed itself, and then filled itself with nice black coffee. Would you accept that? Would you believe me?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
Say something had to put it there.
Exactly. And the reason you would do that, is there any specific reasons you'd conclude that? That the coffee cup someone had to put it together and someone had to fill it and then put it here?
No, not really. I mean, just from my own experience, coffee cups don't just magically appear. Absolutely.
That's exactly the point. I mean, we as human beings, we have the ability to recognize things that are designed, right? That are created, such as the coffee cup. Let me give you another example. Imagine you're walking through the Sahara Desert, for example, right? You're on holiday, you end up in the desert, in the middle of the desert for some reason. As you're walking through the desert, you come across a mobile phone. Just sticking out of the sand, little corner popping out like this, right? Now, imagine I'm with you, and you're surprised at finding the phone there. And I said, you shouldn't be surprised, Chris. I mean, what is the phone made of? The phone is made of glass, it's made of plastic, it's made of silicon.
Yep.
And plastic comes from oil, right? And glass and silicon seem to come from sand. And both of these are abundantly available here in the desert. So what happened was, over millions of years, the sun shone and the winds blew and, certain weather conditions took place which allowed for this phone to form itself and just, land or end up sticking out of the sand like this, where you can pick it up and call home. Yeah. Would you believe me? Would you believe that story?
No.
What would you think in regards to me? You probably think I'm crazy, right?
I think you're out of your mind, yeah. And I wouldn't think that's a plausible story.
Yeah, exactly. And so here's the point I'm trying to get at, and what I'm trying to get at with both these examples for you, Chris, is this phone, as complex as it is, as much as it has a purpose and a function, it's relatively simple compared to our entire universe.
Okay.
Right? Our universe is far more complex. It has far more laws in place, the laws of physics, mathematics, logic. If anything, we need the universe for the phone to exist in the first place, right? For us to have the raw materials and for us to have intelligent human beings that have the ability to create phones, right? So if a simple phone, compared to the universe, a simple phone or a coffee cup requires a creator or a designer, what about the entire universe? Shouldn't the universe have a creator?
There's a good argument behind that. And when you put it that way, then I'd be inclined to agree.
So would you agree that there surely must be a creator that created the universe?
Yes. In the absence of any other logical explanation, that seems the best option.
Okay. Next thing I want to move on to, Chris, is the idea of God's oneness, right? Okay. Now, as Muslims, we would say that God is one. He's uniquely one, right? And again, I want to present you with a very simple argument for the oneness of God. But before I do that, let me just ask you, what would you say in regards to, God? Would you believe naturally God is one, or would you say there's more than one? What's your thoughts on that?
I'd be inclined to, my personal belief would be there is one God.
Okay.
But
any reasons for that?
Not particularly, but understanding other religions as well. Hinduism, they have multiple gods. There is that belief there in other belief systems. So without knowing too much about it, I couldn't say either way.
Okay, but you're inclined to saying that there's one God.
I would say there is a God.
Okay, brilliant. And I would agree with you, because it's a very natural type of concept too. Once you acknowledge that there is a creator, there is a God, you assume naturally that he must be all powerful, he created the universe, etc. Yeah. And then it naturally follows that this creator must be one. I mean, there's no need for a second or a third. It's like, for example, if you're sitting at home and you're watching the football, right? And you suddenly hear a knock on the door, right? What's the first thought that comes to mind?
Someone's at the door.
Someone is there, right? Exactly. You don't assume that there's a whole football team immediately, right? Although there may be, but the natural assumption is there's one. The reason being because the bare minimum that's required for the door to knock is one person. Mm-hmm. It just makes sense, right? Similarly, when we acknowledge there's a creator, it just makes sense God is one. So Chris, another thing I want you to consider as well in regards to the oneness of God is that if there's an all-powerful creator who always existed, he's eternal, and he created this universe, he must be unlike his creation, right? Because he was always there when the universe wasn't there. So if he chose to create the universe must not be like the creator himself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore, what we can say is that the creator must be unlike his creation or the opposite of his creation. So if the creation is finite, the creator is infinite. If there's multiplicity as far as numbers are concerned within creation, the creator must be one. Right? So the creator must be the opposite, unlike his creation. And it's interesting because in the 112th chapter of the Quran, God says that he's unlike anything you can imagine. Right? He's not like anything that you can imagine from a worldly perspective. There is no similitude, there is no equal, etc., etc. Okay. So we can understand some attributes and aspects of God through what he's created, such as that he's all powerful. Why would we say he's all powerful? I mean, look at the entire universe. If you take one atom, you split one atom, what happens? There's an immense release of energy, right? That's one atom. We can't even count the number of atoms in this universe, right? We will also say that this creator must be all-knowing. The reason we say that, well, the universe is based upon laws, right? And a lawgiver must be all-knowing from that perspective. We will say that this being must be eternal. Now, this is an interesting point because some people may say, okay, I acknowledge there's a creator, but who created God? That's a very common question some people would ask. Well, okay, if there is a God, and I acknowledge this, but who created that God? Mm-hmm. Well, what we say to that is, well, okay, well, if you ask the question, who created God? Well, who created the God that created the God that created the universe? And if you go on forever, you run into what you call the problem of the infinite regress. Meaning, let me give you a simple example. Imagine there's this table here, right? We're sitting on the table. Now, imagine you wanted to lift the table, right? But for you to lift the table, you need another person to help you. Right? So you ask me, you say, Imran, can you please help me lift the table? Right? And I say, well, I'd love to help you, Chris, but I've got a bit of a back problem going on, so I can't lift the table, but let me ask the guy behind me. Imagine there's loads of people standing there. I ask the guy behind me, can you help Chris lift the table? And he says, I would love to help Chris lift the table, but I need to ask the guy behind me. Right? So imagine this goes on forever. Would the table ever be lifted from that perspective? No. So the event of the table being lifted off the ground will not take place. Right? In a very similar way, if you were to say that there was a creator that was created by another creator, that was created by another creator, that was created by another creator, he went on forever, the event of the universe coming into existence would never take place. Okay. So there has to be that first cause, as we say. And that first cause is who we refer to as God, as Allah, who's eternal, who has no beginning, who has no end.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
That being said, I want to share another argument with you, which I think will really...
Before you go
yes,
there,
sure.
There is, if you look at your parents, it takes two to create you. Mm-hmm. So there's an argument there. You could have multiple gods, so to speak.
Brilliant. And I know some people may argue that way. That's exactly why I want to share another argument with you, which I think will establish that there is one God a bit more in more of a firm way, right? So there is that point where someone may say, well, why not 2? Why not 3? Why not 4? Why isn't it that they can sort of, come together and produce a universe, or one could take care of one part of the universe, another could take care of another aspect of the universe, etc. So the argument I want to share with you is a point from the Quran itself, where God says, had there been other gods besides God in the heavens and the earth, the entire cosmos, the entire universe would have been completely destroyed, would have been completely ruined. Now, in this verse, we can find a very powerful argument, which is that, let me give you a human example first. Although we don't make examples to God, human examples to God, but I think just to get the point across, it's important to mention this. How many head teachers do you find of a high school? One. How many captains of a ship? One. And there's a reason behind this. There's always one in authority, one in charge. Although we're limited as human beings, but there's one in charge. Now, by greater reason, right, when we're talking about the creator of the heavens and the earth, it makes sense that there's only one, right? And here's the thing. In the verse, God says, if there was other gods besides him, the universe would have been completely destroyed. And there's a reason behind this too. I mean, it makes sense that if there is an all-powerful creator that created everything, maintains and sustains everything, how could we say that there are others? And how could we say that this all-powerful creator has to conform with other beings and deities, agree with them? Because if you were to say that, then you would have to acknowledge he's not all-powerful anymore, because he's dependent upon other beings, lower beings, etc., right? So we would say that if there was other beings, other gods besides the one God, then the universe we live in today would have been completely ruined and destroyed, because all of them would be fighting with each other as to, what color the sky should be. One morning you wake up, Chris, and you see the sky is blue. The next morning it'll be pink. The next morning red. One day you wake up, you see cows walking through the field. The next day they'll be flying over the clouds. It'll be a crazy world to live in, right? But we see a uniformity and order in the world. When you look at the universe, you look at our earth, there is a stability, there is a, if you like, an order that's present. And that points towards the fact that there's only one God. So would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. If we acknowledge there's a creator, there's a God, right? And if he's the being that created everything, and he's the one that provides us with everything, right? He gives us life, he gives us food, he gives us shelter, family, loved ones, all of the things. He even provides for our most trivial needs, right, in life. Then how can we say that he won't provide for our most fundamental need, which is the need for guidance, spiritual guidance, to answer those fundamental questions that we have about purpose and meaning, about where we're going after death, etc. What is life all about?
Yeah, so
surely.
You need to know more about that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not going to come from us because we didn't create ourselves. That's going to obviously come from the one that created us, right? And it makes sense that he would give us this if he has given us, or if he's given us and fulfilled all of our other needs, which are not as important, then he surely must have fulfilled our most important needs as well. Right? And this is why we say this is one reason that, there must be revelation, or this creator must provide us with revelation. Another thing I want to quickly touch upon as well is that, as limited human beings that we all are, whenever we make a product, right? For example, I don't know, when was the last time you went to IKEA?
Last week.
Last week, there you go. We all go there regularly. And it's a great, it's a really good place to go buy cupboards and wardrobes and tables and chairs. And it's a good value as well, right? Now, whenever we buy something that's flat packed like this, or any other product for that matter, when you come home, you open up the package, what's inside it?
Instructions.
Exactly. There's a manual, right? Now, I want to ask you a question, Chris. Why do you think we provide an instruction manual?
So people know exactly what they should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. So they can...
And don't make mistakes.
Exactly. So that, we've made a product which is going to be of service to people, and we want to give them a guidance document which shows them how to use the product, how to take care of it, how to make sure that they don't damage it, how to put it together properly, how to dispose it if they do at the end of its life cycle, etc. And what's interesting, Chris, is that we would do this, although we're limited human beings, but we would still do this because at the end of the day, we have this compassion and concern towards other people that they benefit from what we provide them as a product, right? Now, what I would say is then, if we as limited human beings have this concern and compassion towards others, what about our Creator, the one that made us? Surely he must have provided us with some sort of guidance to direct us in this life, so we make the most of this life. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay, brilliant. I think the next thing we need to discuss quickly as a foundational concept of Islam is revelation.
Okay.
Right? Because this is an integral part of what we believe, which is that we believe that God sent revelation throughout history to different prophets throughout time, but he sent his final revelation to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over 1400 years ago. right? And this revelation was not only for the Arabs or a certain group of people, but it's for the whole of humanity. It's for everyone, right? So I think it's important to discuss revelation, you know. So the very first thing I want to share with you in regards to the miracles of the Quran is the preservation of the Quran, right? So it's over 1400 years old, yet is preserved to the very letter, right? There's been no changes in the Quran. And that's something very interesting. It's something that's acknowledged and recognized by Muslim as well as non-Muslim historians of the Quran, those that have looked into the preservation of the Quran itself. If you look at other texts that are as old, if not older or younger than this, you will see that they've changed. They've gone through many changes and revisions. In most cases, you only have a few parchments that are remaining of these texts. You don't even have the full text. But the Quran is fully preserved. Right? And what's really interesting is that God in the Quran himself it's almost a prophecy where God says that he is the one that's revealed it and that he is the one that will preserve it. And that's indeed what we see is that the Quran has been preserved.
How have they managed to do that? I mean,
so
obviously you see Christianity, the Bible's changed and they changed bits to suit the society at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very interesting observation because what we see is normally when you have certain civilizations or certain religious groups throughout history, when they've grown, they've broken into factions, right? And they've been different groups, etc. And each group would want to go to the text and alter it or change it or tweak it in a way that serves their particular purpose and outlook. That happened with Christianity, but it didn't happen with the Quran. Although there was all the reasons for it to happen because there were different dynasties and different Muslim groups, etc. throughout history who sometimes were at odds with each other, right? But the Quran is still preserved as it was at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Okay. Is there an argument that people could change certain bits anyway without changing the specific text, but they could still use that to?
Sure, some people have probably made that argument. But what we can do is we can look at the manuscripts. So we have the Birmingham manuscript, for example, which is very close to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And when you look at that and you look at the Quran that we have today, it's exactly the same. Okay. The other interesting thing is that the primary mode of preservation of the Quran wasn't written. Although we have that, we do have that, right? And we can that in itself is a great proof. But the primary mode of preservation was oral, because the Arabs were known as an oral community, right? So the Quran was memorized from the Prophet, peace be upon him, by the companions and the people around, and they would recite the Quran continuously because during the 5 daily prayers, the Quran is recited, right? So it's a continuous recitation of the Quran which is going on. So if anyone made any mistakes, they'll be corrected immediately in those prayers. So what we have is this oral tradition which was passed down from generation to generation, right? And we even have it today in the Muslim community where you would have children even 5, 6, 7 years old memorizing the Quran from cover to cover, right? We don't see this with any other text. And what's really interesting is that most of the Muslims in the world today are not Arab. So they don't have a grasp or understanding of the Arabic language, yet they are memorizing the entire Quran, right? So the primary mode of preservation is oral. We still have that continuing today. And what's interesting is, another interesting thing is that those that are learning the Arabic from their teachers, there's a chain that goes all the way back to the Prophet. So-and-so taught so-and-so and so-and-so taught so-and-so, and it goes all the way back to the Prophet, peace be upon him. So what you can do now is you can take the oral tradition and you can map it or match it up with the written tradition, and you'll see that it matches perfectly. So it sort of cross-corroborates, it confirms each other. Right? So that was the first point I wanted to make, is that what's I would say is miraculous or very unique about the Quran.
It's unique to Islam, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any other text anywhere near as old which has been preserved to the degree that the Quran has.
That's interesting.
So the next thing, Chris, I want to quickly mention to you is what's unique about the Quran, or what's miraculous about the Quran, is the fact that of its coherence. The message of the Quran is coherent from beginning to end. And I'll give you an example of this, but just to make the point first, we have to remember the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years, right? Most of the revelations came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, addressing certain situations that were unfolding at the time, right? Okay. So it wasn't a case that the Prophet just came with a revelation which had no significance to what was going on. A lot of it, you can say, was from a worldly perspective, was being dictated by the things that were unfolding, right? There were no computers at the time. There was no way of compiling the Quran and then studying it and changing things and altering things and aligning things. None of this was going on. Revelation was coming down in drips and drabs over a period of 23 years. That being the case, at the end of the day, when you read the Quran from cover to cover, something unique that stands out is that there is no contradictions in the Quran. There is a coherence in the Quran in regards to its themes and the ideas and the concepts it mentions. I'll give you one example. Let's take the most fundamental, which is the concept of God, right? Now, when it comes to the concept of God, God tells us in the Quran that He's uniquely one, right? He has no partners, He has no equals. His oneness is unique from the perspective that you can't break God into parts or split God into bits in any way, shape, or form. He is eternal. He has no beginning. He has no end. Now, this concept of God is maintained throughout the Quran from beginning to end. So it's not the case that in the early revelations, you would find that God is one, but 10 years later, in a later revelation, God says, no, He's three, or there's three distinct parts to Him. And in a further later revelation, God says that, no, there are two gods, etc. It doesn't work like this. The concept of God is consistent throughout the Quran, as is the case with all other concepts and ideas that are shared in the Quran. Now, for a book that's revealed over 23 years, it's quite thick when you have it in a volume in your hand. To maintain such consistency and coherence over this period, without having the ability to edit and change things around, I would say it's quite miraculous from that perspective. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I definitely would say that, yeah. Okay.
One last thing I want to share with you in regards to the miracles of the Quran is its linguistic miracle. Okay? Now, one of the challenges the Quran makes to its early recipients, the people that were there, and to humanity as a whole, is God says, if you are in doubt as to what we revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, then produce even a single chapter like it, right? So it's a challenge being made. Now, something unique of significance here is that the people at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were the best suited to meet the challenge of the Quran because they were experts in the Arabic language. They had mastered the Arabic language. They were known for their poetry, right? Now, these people are being challenged that if you have any doubts in regards to what the Prophet is sharing with you, this revelation that's coming to him, then produce something like it, right? Produce, even if it's a small chapter like it. The smallest chapter of the Quran is like 3 verses long, right? It's not big. It's like 10 words or something, right? Now, the best of poets, the best of people at the time was sent to challenge the Prophet by some of the people that were his adversaries, that didn't want to agree with him, that wanted to refute him. One of the greatest of poets at the time was sent to challenge the Prophet, peace be upon him. And when he came and he listened to the Quran, he just returned back to his people. He says, look, I'm the best of poets amongst you, right? And these were his words. He says, I'm the best of poets amongst you, creation, but I've never heard anything like this. There was no way of him challenging it. It's because there is something very unique about the Arabic of the Quran, right? It's Arabic, but it sort of just de-scopes the whole Arabic language. It's just a new form, which they just could not replicate, right? Because it has beauty as far as the way it sounds. It has accuracy as far as its words are concerned. It's very accurate with its word choices. There is a rhyme to it, right? And there is the message, the coherence of the Quran in itself, and to maintain all of these things, that you're accurate as far as the information is concerned. You deliver accurate information as far as, in a very beautiful and eloquent way, in a way that it rhymes sometimes. But at the same time, you're not adding superfluous amounts of information just to achieve these effects. You're very concise with what you're saying. All of these things, and again, maintained throughout the entire Quran, over all of the chapters of the Quran, is something very profound, right? And it's something that the Arabs at the time could not challenge. And they just could not produce something like it. It was impossible for them, right? As far as its message was concerned, as far as its rhyme was concerned, as far as its prose were concerned, it just blew anything they understood about the language out of the water, right? But at the very same time, it wasn't gibberish because it made complete sense. Yeah. And that was what was baffling about it, that here is a revelation, it's coming in the Arabic, right? The language that we've mastered. Yet at the very same time, it doesn't conform to any of the known structures in the Arabic language. But whenever you break the structures of the Arabic language, well, you're going to be talking gibberish, just like in English, right? We have grammar. Now, if I was to come up with my own structure, I would probably be speaking gibberish. It wouldn't make any sense, right? It's like saying coffee, Chris, candle, love. What does that mean? It means nothing, right? But the Quran had this effect. It broke the rules of the known Arabic language, but it wasn't gibberish. It was very clear, concise, and precise in its message, in its meaning, etc. Yeah. And that was something miraculous about the Quran, that the Arabs just could not challenge it. And even till this very day, anyone that's tried has failed, right? They've either tried to meet the rhyme and the message they've tried to get across didn't make any sense, or they focus on the message, but they've not been able to achieve those rhetorical devices the Quran uses, etc., etc. So that challenge that God makes in the Quran has not been met. And what I would argue is that if it couldn't be met by the Arabs at the time, who were the best suited to meet it, it's not going to be met by anyone that comes after them, right? Because like every language, the Arabic went through a process of degeneration, meaning degradation. English, you would say at the time of Shakespeare, was at its pinnacle. But since then, it's just been like slang, and you have all these type of, it's degraded from that perspective. In the same way with Arabic, the same thing happened. At the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Arabic was at its pinnacle. But since then, it's just been going through a process of degradation, right? So if someone at that time couldn't meet the challenge, it's impossible that someone today would be able to meet the challenge. Okay. So Chris, would you, are you happy to acknowledge that the Quran must be revelation from God?
Yeah, from everything you said, I do believe that, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So let's move on to the final thing that I want to discuss with you, which is prophethood. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, what we believe as Muslims, when you take the declaration of faith, you say that you testify there is no God worthy of worship except God, Allah, and that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was his final messenger, right? So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the person that God sent revelation through. And he was a role model for us as a human being, And what's interesting, some people made the claim at the time that why doesn't God send angels to him, right? Why doesn't God send these other beings, that could show us the truth, etc.? But I think what's powerful is that God sends humans as messengers, or chooses humans as messengers, because they can now make things real for us. That we don't think, oh, it's just impossible for us to achieve these things these angels are saying, because they're angels. They're not human. They don't understand humanity. But when the messenger is a human, we have now a practical role model to look at and how to live. And that's exactly what the Prophet, peace be upon him, was. He was a practical role model for humanity. He was the walking Quran, as he was referred to. So he lived the revelation. Now, when it comes to the Prophet, peace be upon him, he made a claim, right? Obviously, which was that I am the messenger of God, right? The Quran makes this claim as well, that for him to say that he is the messenger of God. Now, when anyone makes a claim, we can assess the claim, and there's three real possibilities for any claim that's made, right? Either the person is lying, either the person is deluded or mad, or the person is telling the truth. These are the real possibilities, right? Now, we can apply these same three possibilities to the Prophet, peace be upon him's claim too, right? When he makes the claim that I am the messenger of God, let's analyze it. Okay, was he lying? Was he deluded or mad? Or was he telling the truth? Let's analyze each one historically, okay? Now, one thing I want to mention before we get into this is that when it comes to the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we can argue that he's probably the most well-documented man in history.
Really?
Yeah. So some may say, well, no, Jesus is, right? Because he's so well-known. But that's the difference. Jesus, peace be upon him, we say Jesus is probably the most well-known individual in history. Like, you know of him, like there was Jesus, but you don't know him, right? You don't know much about him and his life, right? But whereas the Prophet, peace be upon him, we have pretty much everything documented about his life. How he slept, how he woke up, how he ate, how he walked, how he smiled, how he engaged with people, everything, right? And the reason it's recorded is because the companions went to great lengths to preserve everything about the Prophet and his actions, right? Because they believed it was significant and it was a lesson for all of us as human beings, and how he was a role model for us to follow. So based on his life historically, let's analyze that claim that he was a messenger of God. Could he be a liar? That's the first thing we need to look at, okay? Now, when you read and study the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you read his biography, you read his sayings, one thing you'd realize is that he was known as the truthful and the trustworthy amongst his community, even before revelation ever came to him, right? He was never known to lie even about the most trivial things, okay, right? He was also someone that was loved and trusted by the different tribes that were around him at the time, right? And that's a very hard thing to do, especially, if there's warring tribes, you can only, if you take if one of them likes you, the other's going to obviously have a problem with you. But what was unique about him, his character, was that everyone loved him. People trusted him. People would leave their belongings with him, right? So that, whenever they would travel or go on expeditions, they would leave their precious belongings with him. So they trusted him as someone trustworthy, someone that wouldn't wrong them in any way, shape or form, right? What's even more interesting, that's the first thing. The second thing is, in regards to the first thing, something I want you to consider, Chris, is if someone is not known to ever lie about simple things, trivial things, worldly things, why would we now consider that he would lie about God and something so great? It doesn't make any sense, right? Would you agree to that point?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, second thing I want to quickly touch upon is the Prophet. Now, a liar lies. Let's think about the psychology of a liar for a second. Why do people lie? People lie for two main reasons, I would say. Either, number one, to protect themselves. As children, you know, when they're eating sweets from the cupboard, as soon as they get caught, or the parent goes to them, where's the sweets gone? Like, I didn't do it. Because they're protecting themselves, right? As human beings, we lie to protect ourselves. Or some people lie to gain something, right? You maybe want to gain something or attain something, so you make up a lie, right? These are the two main reasons people lie. I mean, it's not human nature to wake up and say, you know, oh, it's Thursday today, day to lie, you know, so today I'm just going to lie. We don't work like that, right?
You can do it to protect others possibly as well.
Exactly. Okay, so that's another one. So protect yourself, to benefit in some way, and to protect others or benefit others in some way, right? So those are the three main reasons we could say people lie or make up things, okay? Now, when you look at the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, once revelation came to him and he started to preach the revelation to his community, his close family members, and then his extended community, initially the Meccans at the time didn't see it as a threat. It wasn't a problem, right? But when his message started to catch on and people started to follow him, then they started to see, okay, we need to stop this, right? And the reason they wanted to stop this was because, you know, the Arabs were not known for much, but one of the things they had was the Mecca was a trade route, and in the center was the Kaaba, the house you've seen in Mecca. And what would happen is, because there were idols in the Kaaba and around its vicinity, people from all over Arabia would come to worship those idols once a year, right? And this meant trade, because people would come from far away. They didn't have jets and trains at the time, so they would take time for coming. And when they would come, trade would take place, right? So it became a means of making wealth and bringing wealth into Mecca, right? So the idols were very significant for the Meccans. They didn't want to do away with them. But the message of Islam was what? Worship only God alone. Don't worship idols. Don't worship things you create with your own hands. Don't worship worldly things. Now the Meccans, when they saw his messages catching on, this was a big problem economically as well, right? So they wanted to stop it. Now, one of the ways they tried to stop it was they said to the Prophet, at times, they went to the Prophet, they said, look, let's strike a deal. What do you want? We will give you whatever you want. You want money, you want power, you want women, you want influence, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. Just stop preaching this message, right? At other times they said to him, look, okay, fine, you don't want to stop preaching this message. Let's do something. Like, you know, sometimes we worship your God, sometimes you worship our God. Let's come to a compromise. The Prophet, peace be upon him, rejected this, right? Now, what's very interesting here, from the perspective of a psychology of a liar, what we said, either a liar lies to benefit in some way from a worldly perspective, or to protect oneself, okay? Or others around them. Now, by rejecting everything that the Meccans were offering him, like they were saying, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. But he rejected everything, meaning he had no worldly desires. He didn't want anything from a worldly perspective for this message. Because if he was lying for some sort of worldly gain, this is the opportunity, man. Okay, fine, perfect. This is what I wanted. Yeah, that's fine. You give it to me. I've just received a new revelation that I should conform with what you're saying. It would be easy to do that, right? But he didn't. He rejected that. Not only did he not benefit from a worldly perspective, but on top of it, what ended up happening because of this, the next step the Meccans took at the time was they persecuted the Muslims. They boycotted them. They pushed them out of the cities. They stopped trade with them, right? So anyone that was a Muslim could not trade with the Meccans, right? This meant what eventually ended up happening, the early Muslim community started to starve. Muslims started to die, right? The elderly started to die just because of the hard circumstances that resulted from this situation. So now when we analyze this, nor is the Prophet, peace be upon him, benefiting from a worldly perspective, nor is he being protected in any way. If anything, now the whole Meccan community has turned against him, right? So if you look at his psychology from this perspective, there is no reason for him to lie. There's nothing he's going to benefit from, right? So looking at this, we can conclude that he wasn't a liar, right? So we can cross that option out. Okay. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So the next option now is, could he be a liar? Could he be deluded or mad? That's another possibility. Now again, if we look at his life, I would say to call the Prophet, peace be upon him, deluded or mad, it's like saying, no one is sane. Because he was not only a family man, he was a spiritual leader, he was a communal leader, he was someone that people trusted. They trusted his intellect, his judgment, his wisdom, right? For example, I'll give you one example. Even before he became a prophet, you know the Kaaba, the house in Mecca, right? Which Muslims go to visit. Which, by the way, they don't pray to, they don't worship. It's just the first house of worship that was built on earth. So it's a direction for Muslims to worship and to unite towards, right? So at a point, they were rebuilding the Kaaba, the Meccans. Now, there was different tribes that were rebuilding the Kaaba, and as there were different tribes, eventually what happened was there was one stone or part of the Kaaba that they had to put in place, but it was something that was really held in high esteem. So what happened was that the tribes started to now argue with each other, right? Because they're like, who's going to put that stone back in its place? One tribe's like, I'm going to do it, the other's like, I'm going to do it, and this almost came to blows, right? Yeah. And again, the Arabs were known to be really rough around the edges, right? Any opportunity to go to war, they would go to war, right? So this was going to seem like it was shaping up to be an opportunity for war. But they came to this agreement. They said, look, okay, let's stop. The next person that walks into the vicinity, into this area, we'll let him decide as to which tribe puts the stone back in its place, right? So they're all sitting there waiting. And, you know, what happens? Who comes is the Prophet, peace be upon him. He obviously wasn't the Prophet at the time. He hadn't received revelation at the time, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, comes to the vicinity, and what was interesting was that all of the tribes were happy to see him, right? Because they all trusted him. They trusted his judgment. And the solution that the Prophet provided at the time was phenomenal. You know what he did? He said, look, let's get a cloth, okay? Get the stone, put it in the middle of the cloth. Each one of you tribe member, each one of you tribes, the leader of the tribe, holds one corner, and you raise it up to where it needs to be, and then he pushed the stone and put it back in its place. So that way, everyone's now, gets an opportunity to be equal in putting that stone back in its place, right? So this shows that, this man was very sharp, intelligent, and had wisdom as far as how to deal with people, right? These aren't the traits of someone that's mad or deluded, right? Yeah. Other things to consider is that he was given revelation, which, is followed by millions of people across the world, Another thing to consider, his sayings, his teachings in regards to the community, his spiritual teachings, his teachings in regards to animals. All of these things that he taught about justice, love, compassion, taking care of the world around you, these aren't teachings of someone that's mad or deluded, right? Yeah. Mad and deluded people don't bring world religions into existence and allow for them to or a system which grows to such an extent over time, right? Which is followed by millions of people, which provides deep answers to the philosophical questions that we have, right? So I would say when you study the life of the Prophet, you study his teachings, what he said, what he brought to humanity. It's a very long shot claiming that he was mad or deluded. I would say it's easy to cross that option out as well. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say the only real conclusion is, as we made, is that he was telling the truth. Would you agree to that?
Yeah. Yeah. We've eliminated everything else. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So Chris, moving on to, I guess, to just summarize what we discussed, we went through the journey of just looking at, okay, God's existence. God exists. God is one. Mm-hmm. We've also acknowledged that there's a need for revelation and that God did provide revelation. He provided revelation throughout history, and his final revelation was the Quran. And we've seen reasons for why the Quran is from God. We've also looked at the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? And that the Prophet was indeed telling the truth. And I would even say that the point on prophethood is so significant that if we were to only prove prophethood, it would prove the rest of Islam. Because if the Prophet's telling the truth, then the Quran is true and it's from God. Do you see what I'm saying? So it flows both ways. So if you agree to all of this, Chris, I mean, the only thing that's left to do is acknowledge what you already believe, right? Which is to take the testament of faith and become Muslim. So would you like to be Muslim?
Yes.
Okay. So before we do that, there are a few things that I want to clarify for you. The first one is Shahada. The first, which is the belief, the testimony of faith. Okay. The second one is Salah, which is the prayer, the 5 daily prayers. The third one is Zakah, which is the obligatory charity that every Muslim has to pay. It's a certain percentage of the wealth relative to how much they earn a year, which is given to the poor and the needy, right? The fourth one is Saum, which is fasting, right? It's once a year, there's a month, Ramadan, where we Muslims fast. I'm sure you've seen Muslims fast.
Oh, yeah. Do you not do it any other time of the year as well?
You can do, voluntarily. There are fasts. There's 2 fasts. The Prophet used to fast Mondays and Thursdays, and he recommended to fast Mondays and Thursdays every week. There's also certain days during the year where you can fast as well, or it's recommended that you fast. But the obligatory fasts are the fast of Ramadan, which is that particular month, where you stop eating at you stop eating at sunrise, and then you don't eat all the way till sunset, and once the sun is set, which is the time of the Maghrib prayer, which is the evening prayer, and then you can eat.
Okay.
So that's the fasting once a year. And the final thing is going to Hajj, which is the major pilgrimage, which is to be done once in your lifetime at least, if you can afford it and you have the financial means.
Okay.
So those are the 5 pillars of Islam. Those are the key 5 things that every Muslim should try to do to the best of their ability, which is an obligation upon them, right? And then there's also one thing I want to quickly point out, Chris, other than what we've just discussed here, is that before one decides to accept Islam, although it makes sense to them, is to understand, for them to really internalize and understand their relationship with their Creator. What is the dynamic here? That's the key thing to understand. It's for one to understand that they have a Creator, but that they are the servant of this Creator, they are the slave of this Creator, right? They were created to worship God and God alone, not to worship anything or anyone else, right? And what's powerful about this servitude and slavery in Islam to God alone is that this slavery, this servitude, frees you from the slavery of everything else. And that's something very, very profound. I mean, we live in a time where you want to be liberated, right? Everyone wants to be liberated and free. But what people fail to realize is that we're sold a false notion of liberation, because everyone's a slave to something or the other, right? Some people are slave to materialism, other people are slave to other people, ideas, philosophies, everything. Some people have 50 masters, right? And that they're a slave to. But what Islam says, no, you were created to be a slave of just one. That you submit to Allah alone. And when you submit yourself to God alone, automatically what happens as a result is that it frees you from the slavery of the world. It frees you of the slavery of other ideas, concepts, views, people. It truly elevates you as a human being, right? You are a slave of the Creator, not the creation anymore. Yeah. And there, in that, the human being finds himself, his true self, and finds his Creator. You know, so that's essentially, if you recognize this and you want this true liberation from the world and everything around you, and you want to be a slave of your Creator, and by submitting yourself to God, which is in Islam, which means submission to God, you know, by doing this, you want to fulfill the purpose of your existence and make the most of this life, then I would welcome you and encourage you, you know, to take the declaration of faith.
Okay.
So if you're ready, we can repeat that. First, we can do it in the Arabic, and then we can do it in English.
Okay.
Okay. So the Arabic, we'll do the Arabic first. And basically, what we're saying is that we bear witness that there is no deity, no God, nothing worthy of worship except Allah alone, right? And that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his final messenger. That's what you're going to say in the Arabic. I'm telling you that just so you don't feel like I'm sneaking something else in there, right? So the Arabic, I'll repeat and you can repeat after me. It's Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. So in the English, if you repeat after me as well, I bear witness that there is no deity and nothing worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his final messenger.
Is his final messenger.
That's it. It's as simple as that. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.